Hello and welcome to another edition of Tech Videos. I'm Gary Zambito and this is Todd Coulter. And today Todd is going to demonstrate how to take a autococker apart, completely dismantle it, clean it, and check for imperfections and then reassemble it. So Todd, why don't we get started?
To start the basic teardown, the first thing we're going to want to do is remove the barrel. Just simply unscrew that and set that aside. We'll put it back on later. After we remove the barrel, we're going to go ahead and remove the bolt. To do that, you just remove the pin and slide the bolt straight out the back. After you remove the bolt, then go ahead and remove the cocking rod. This should never be in too tight. As long as it's in there thumb tight, that's fine. Pull the cocking rod out, set that aside, and now we can go ahead and remove the back block. That should just easily screw right off. After you have the back block removed, we can go ahead and remove our airline. Now, depending on what kind of airline you have, it may be more difficult than this, but this is just a micro line, so we undo the little clips that hold it in. And after that, we go ahead and remove the screws that hold our drop forward on. And generally, they use about a 1/8 inch Allen key to remove those, so we just take these off. After you have the screws removed from your drop forward, you can go ahead and set that aside. Next, we're going to undo the main reg, and to do that, we just unscrew the reg. Sometimes they're on pretty tight, but hopefully you had it well greased up and it's easy to get off. After you have the main reg removed, we can go ahead and remove the two screws that hold our grip frame on. We have one in the front and one in the back. And again, you just use a 1/8 inch Allen key to remove those two screws. Once you have the trigger screws removed, you can go ahead and twist the frame of the trigger assembly and pull it away from the body. Now if it gets stuck, you don't want to pull too hard because you take the chance of bending your three-way actuating rod. So just gently remove the trigger away from the body and set that aside. After you've removed the trigger frame, we can go ahead and remove the front set screw in the three-way coupling. This coupling holds the three-way actuating rod with the three-way shaft. We're going to remove this front one so we can separate the two so we can remove our front block. To do this, you just take a small Allen key and remove that set screw. After you've removed your set screw, we're ready to go ahead and remove the front block. To do that, we take a 3/16 Allen key and just unscrew the front block lug that holds on the front block. Sometimes these can be pretty tight, but if you just kind of take your time with them, you'll get them off without removing or damaging any of the body. Once you have this fully unscrewed, go ahead and remove your Allen key, and the front block should just slide away from the gun. After you've removed the front block, we can go ahead and remove the back set screw in our three-way coupling. After we remove this set screw, we're just going to unscrew the coupling from the three-way actuating rod. Once you've removed the set screw, you're going to want to go ahead and take the three-way actuating rod and pull it up to the ASA adapter and lean the bar up against the body to use as leverage. And I found that the easiest way to remove this coupling is, because sometimes they're a little difficult to get off, is to just take an Allen key, slide it through the front hole, and twist it right off the rod. After we have all the external parts removed off the gun, we're going to go ahead and remove the internals. First thing we do is take a 3/16 Allen key and remove the velocity set screw that's in the back of the gun. Once you have the velocity set screw out, we just go ahead, tilt the gun over, pull out the hammer spring. After you have the hammer spring removed, we're going to go ahead and raise the lug. You do this by using a 1/8 inch Allen key and sticking it down through the hole in the top of the gun. Once you get it in the hole, you're going to have to line that up with the lug. To do that, the easiest way to do that is lean the gun forward to get the hammer in its forward position, and you'll find the Allen key catches in the lug itself. Once you catch the lug, you just want to back it up. Once you have the lug raised enough, and you don't want to raise it too much because you'll back it into the top side of the chamber and the hammer won't fall out. But once you have the lug raised, you can go ahead and take your Allen key out and just dump out your hammer. Once you have the hammer removed, we can go ahead and take our valve tool, and there are several different companies that make valve tools. This one happens to be made by Cap, and they're only a few dollars. WGP also makes one. But you want to take your valve tool, stick it down in the back of the gun, catch the valve retaining nut, and just unscrew that out. Once you have this loose enough, you can go ahead and pull it out, and the valve retaining nut should come right out with the tool. If it doesn't, just pour it out. After you have the valve retaining nut out of the gun, we can go ahead and remove our valve set screw, which is located on the bottom side of the gun. And you do this by using a 5/32 inch Allen key. And it shouldn't be in there very tight. It should just be in there thumb tight. You just want to remove this nut. After you have the valve retaining nut removed, go ahead and just take anything long and skinny, I use an Allen key sometimes, and just push the valve out of the gun. It should just fall right out. Well, that completes the teardown. We removed everything from the outside and the inside of the gun. Got our valve removed and everything. Now the only thing left to do is put it back together and clean up all the parts. To start the rebuild, we're just going to run a swab through the gun first to remove any debris that might be still in the gun. Run it through the top chamber once, and then through the bottom chamber for good measure. When putting the gun back together, we're going to want to check our valve to make sure all the seals are still good. The one thing you're going to want to check is the valve, or the valve O-ring that goes around the valve itself. Once you've examined your O-rings and checked your cup seal, you can go ahead and just put a little bit of oil right on the face of the cup seal and on the stem itself, just to make sure that that's moving correctly. Once you have the valve all lubricated, you can go ahead and drop your valve spring down in, and then your valve down on top of it. Now you'll notice that there's two holes on your valve. Doesn't matter which one's up or down, they're both the same size. So just try to line it up so that the valve retaining nut can hold it in and the valve set screw will be able to hold it in, and just drop it down into the gun. With the valve placed into the gun, you're going to want to line up the valve with the hole for the valve set screw. Now I'm holding the valve in place using an Allen key in the back part of the gun because there's a spring tension pushing back on the valve, so you're going to have to hold tension on it to get it lined up. Then just take an Allen key and line up the two holes as best you can. Once you have them lined up, you can take your valve set screw and put this right back in, and as you put this in, you're only going to want to have this thumb tight, because all you're trying to do is make it so air can't pass through that hole in the valve. Once you have the valve set screw in place, we can go ahead and take our valve retaining nut and drop that down into the gun. Once that's in place, take your valve tool and just go ahead and tighten it in. And with this one, you're going to want to get it pretty tight. Once we have the valve retaining nut in, we can go ahead and put our hammer back in the gun. And when we do this, we're going to want to make sure that the Allen key is facing up so that we can adjust our lug once we have it in our gun. When you've found the top side of the lug, just go ahead and slide it in the gun to line up the hole so that you can drop the lug. When dropping the lug, just give it a few turns. You don't need too many, just so that the lug stays straight up and down when we complete the rest of the assembly. With the hammer in place, we can go ahead and reinsert our hammer spring, and then take our velocity set screw and screw it back down into the gun. Now a good starting point for the velocity set screw is about 4 threads down inside the gun. That's going to make it so when we put our gun back together, there's going to be some velocity behind the hammer. Any less, then it's just not going to cycle very well. So about 4 threads down inside the back of the gun. With the velocity set screw installed, we can go ahead and reinsert our 3-way actuating rod and reapply our 3-way coupling. Before we reinstall our front block, we're going to want to clean any debris that might be on the inside of the front block and also on this O-ring. It's also a good idea to apply a thin layer of grease around this front O-ring. It ensures that we're not going to have any leaks when we put our front block back on. Once you have everything lubed up on that front block, we can go ahead and reinsert it into the body of the gun and use our 3/16 Allen key to tighten it back up to the gun. And here, you're going to want to get it pretty tight, or else you run the risk of having some leaks once we get the gun all back together and aired up. Once we have the front block installed, we can go ahead and reattach our 3-way shaft with the 3-way coupling. And to do this successfully, you want to make sure that the flat part of the 3-way shaft lines up with that hole in the 3-way coupling. If you don't have that lined up, things aren't going to match up correctly. Your 3-way is not going to operate correctly. So make sure that you have those two things lined up, and the end result should be that the set screw winds up flush with the coupling. Now it may take you a few tries to get this lined up correctly, but you want to make sure that you do this part correctly. Otherwise the gun won't function when we get it back together. The final product should be with the set screw flush with the coupling. With the 3-way actuating rod attached, we can go ahead and reinsert the screws that hold the grip frame on. And again, we just use our 1/8 inch Allen key wrench to tighten those up. With the screws in for the grip frame, we're ready to go ahead and reinstall our main reg. And again, that just screws back on, and it doesn't really have to be on all that tight. With the main reg installed, we're ready to reapply the back block. You just screw that back on, and you don't want to get it to the point where it slaps against the gun. You want to back it out and leave about enough room to fit a piece of paper in between the main body and the back block. So that's about right. Any further in, then you're going to get slapping. That's just going to make the gun a lot louder. So back it out so you have a little bit of space. At this point, we're ready to reinstall the bolt, but before we do, we're going to want to make sure that our bolt is clean of any debris and paint that might have gotten on from the last time we played. We're also going to want to apply some oil to the 2 O-rings that are on the front side of the bolt, and also a little oil to the back side of the bolt here, which is going to be in contact with the main body. With the bolt cleaned and oiled, we can just reinsert it back into the gun, take our pin, put that back in, and put our barrel back on. With the bolt installed, we're ready to reinsert our cocking rod, and again, just make sure that this is thumb tight. And then once we have that done, we can go ahead and rehook our macro line, micro line, or steel braided hose, whichever you have, back up. Our gun is totally rebuilt and cleaned up. Now we're ready to go ahead and time it. The first thing we're going to want to do to reset the gun up is remove our bolt so that we can adjust our lug to catch with our sear. And right now, if you pull on the cocking rod, you'll notice that the 2 aren't catching at all. So we'll take our 1/8 inch Allen key, drop it back down in, try to catch our lug, and you may have to give a little pull on this cocking rod to find that Allen key spot. But what you're going to want to do is tighten the Allen key down so we're lowering the lug down towards the sear, okay? And you're probably going to want to go in half-turn increments here. I just want a full turn. I'm still not catching it, so you're going to want to redo this with the Allen key. Drop it down another half turn, and we're starting to get a little something, but you're going to want to keep going down until we get the sear and lug to catch completely. And you can kind of hear that. We're just about catching it, so I'm going to go in another quarter turn, and now it's catching completely. Once you get this to catch on the sear, you're going to at least need to go in another half turn so that it catches consistently when there's actually air on the gun. Because at this point, it catches with our fingers, and that's fine and dandy, but what we're going to need to go in is another half turn so that it catches when there's air on the gun. And really, to be safe, you might as well go in 3/4 of a turn from where it catches so that you get a little less half stroking. But you can see that's catching well, and we're ready to go ahead and adjust the bolt. To check to see if our bolt is in adjustment or not, what we're going to want to do is have the gun decocked and then look down in the breech of our gun as we pull back on the black block. When we hear that click, that's when the gun's cocked. And now you'll notice that there's a lot of bolt exposed in that breech. If you have any bolt exposed into the breech, that means that the paint, when the gun is cocked, can't get down into the breech very well. And if this is the case, you're going to have a lot of chopping and a lot of pinching of your paint. And this is one of the most common problems that I see in autocockers, is that people's bolts are out of adjustment. What we're going to need to do is adjust our cocking rod in the back to compensate for this. Let's go ahead and adjust our cocking rod. To adjust our bolt and our cocking rod, what we're going to want to do is remove the cocking rod from the gun and take a wrench and just clasp it onto the back of our cocking rod. Then we'll just take our Allen key and release the set screw in the back of the cocking rod. Now you don't have to take it all the way out. You just need to loosen it up so that we can back out this rear part on the cocking rod. And now, if the bolt is too far forward in the breech, you're going to want to back this out. If it's too far back in the main body and you can't see it at all, you're going to want to come forward with it. So ours was really far into our breech, so we're going to want to back it out a bit. And we'll try here just to start off. So once we have it to where we want it, put our wrench back on it, take our Allen key, tighten up our set screw in the back, and once we get this tight, we'll just reinsert it into the gun and check to see if our bolt is out of our breech this time. At this point, we have reinserted our cocking rod and we're ready to check our bolt again to see if it's an adjustment. And now this may take a few tries to get it adjusted correctly, but what we're going to want to do is just pull back on this back block and see where it clicks. And here it clicks, and you'll see that the bolt is fully clearing the breech, and there's a little bit hanging out, but you're not going to want any more than what's hanging out right now. A 1/16 of an inch is probably a little too much. Some people say that's about what you want. Personally, through experience, I found that it's a little too much to be hanging out. I like to just about have it clearing the breech totally. Now again, this may take a few tries to get it perfect, but you're really going to want to make sure that this is adjusted correctly. As I said before, this is one of the most common problems with autocockers if they pinch too much. Now before we adjust our three-way, I think it's important that you know what the three-way does before we go messing with it. What happens is air comes out of the front of our regulator, goes back to the middle prong in the three-way. Then the three-way directs it on a normal slide trigger to the front prong, which then directs air to the back of the ram. That puts pressure on the ram and the plunger that's inside it and pushes it forward, sucking the back block in. Then as we pull the trigger, there's two O-rings in here. One O-ring slides across this back prong and it links the middle and the back, sending the air from the back of the three-way up to the front of the ram, pushing the back block back. Now what we're trying to do here is we're trying to get the O-ring between this middle and back prong to be butted right up against this back hole so that it takes as minimal and as short of trigger pull as possible to actuate the ram to push a back block back. So what we're going to be doing here is we're going to be edging this coupling back little by little and testing it each time to the point where we have as short a pull as possible. That's going to ensure that we have as few short strokes as possible. Now that we have the gun all aired up, the cocking rod back in place, the bolt, we're ready to go ahead and adjust our three-way. And what we're trying to do here, basically what we're trying to do is we're trying to adjust the O-ring that's in between the middle and back prong. We're trying to get that O-ring back as close as we can to this back prong without making it so that the gun wants to cycle without even pulling the trigger. So what we're going to do is we're going to take some needle nose pliers and we're going to pull this coupling is back along the three-way actuating rod as far as we can. Now in some guns you may run out of threads, other guns you can do a full adjustment. But what we're going to do is we're going to back this coupling down this rod as far as we can go until we get a constant leak. And what that's going to make it so that we have the shortest trigger pull possible, and the space between the O-ring here and the hole is as minimal as possible. So we'll just take our needle nose pliers and back this along the three-way actuating rod. And what we're looking for is a constant leak. And right now you can hear that it's hissing as I adjust it, but well, we got a little bit of a leak here. But what happens is when you knock it a little bit, the leaks will go away. So we're just adjusting and adjusting and adjusting, and we still haven't got a constant leak. And on this one, we're just about at the end of the rod. And so we may not be able to do a complete adjustment on this one, but on the next segment when we actually install a swing trigger, maybe we'll be able to adjust that one completely. But you can see that this gun is still shooting fine. We don't have any leaks in our three-way, and we're going to try to tighten it up a little bit more, because basically what this means, if we don't have leaks, is that we still can adjust this a little bit more, and that there's more slop to take out of the trigger. And I think that's about all we're going to get on this one. We may be able to get another half turn, but I think that's about all. And that's a good sign. When we pull the trigger, we get a leak. So that kind of lets us know that we're a little too far. So we're actually going to back this down the rod a hair. And there. We backed it out about a half turn. We no longer have a leak when we pull the trigger. And now when we go into rapid fire, we'll see how it shoots. Seems like it's cycling pretty well. And this gun is timed. Once we have our timing job done, we need to go ahead and put our set screw back into the back side of the coupling to ensure that our timing job stays where it's at. If you don't have that set screw, that coupling is allowed to spin, and as you shoot the gun, it's going to change, and eventually your timing job is totally wrecked without that set screw. So make sure that you put that back in, and this is a good set screw to check every time you go out and play. Make sure that that's tight, or make sure that it's there. If it's not there or it's loose, you're going to have some problems by the end of the day. In this section of the video, we're going to be installing our swing trigger onto our gun. To do that, we just remove the 2 screws that hold the grip frame on and bolt on our new grip frame. After we have the grip frame installed, the next thing that we need to do is reverse the direction of our hoses coming from our 3-way to our ram. And here we need to have the hose that goes from the back of the 3-way go to the back of the ram, and the hose that goes from the front of the 3-way going to the front of the ram. With the hoses repositioned, we need to adjust our lug. To do that, we just pull our bolt back out and drop our 1/8 inch Allen key down into the gun again. And we're just going to check this before we adjust it, and we can see that our sear and lug aren't catching at all. So that lets us know that we need to drop it down. And I'm going to take one full turn at it and see if we catch anything. And we're kind of catching on it, and that's a good sign, because once we get there, we know that we really only need to go in another quarter turn to get it to consistently catch. And that's good. And from there, make a mark of where that's at, and we want to drop it down another 3/4 of a turn. With the lug readjusted, it's time to readjust our 3-way. And we'll notice when we pull the trigger that nothing happens with the back block. It doesn't even attempt to recock the gun. So that means that we need to go further forward with our 3-way. And what we're really trying to do here is take the O-ring that's in between the middle and the front prong and edge it right up to that front prong as close as we can get it, so that the gun doesn't actuate by itself before we even pull the trigger. So to do that, what we're going to do is we are going to loosen the coupling on our 3-way actuating rod and try to move those O-rings up the 3-way to get to that front hole. And you can see we're there, but we really haven't got a consistent leak yet, and that's really what we're looking for. So we're just going to edge it up a little bit more, and we're trying to get this trigger pull as sensitive as possible. And there you can hear we have a constant leak. So from that point, we're going to want to just back it off that front hole a little bit, because we went a little bit too far. And from the front hole, when you start to get that consistent leak, we're probably going to want to go back a full turn. And I went back a half, and there's the other half. And now that sounds pretty good, but we're still getting a little leak. And you may experience some little leak even if you back it off a full turn. You're just going to want to back it out until you get rid of all the leaks. And what that means is you're as close as possible to that front prong as you can be without having consistent leaks. Just to recap what we did in this section, first we installed our new grip onto the gun. After that, we repositioned our hoses. Third, we repositioned our lug, and again we just had to go down, catch the lug, and then go in 3/4 of a turn from where it catches. And then we readjusted our 3-way, and we brought that forward till we got a consistent leak, and then brought it back about a turn, turn and a half, to the point where we removed all the leaks in the gun. In this section of the video, we're going to go over the upgrades that you can do to your Autococker and I'm going to recommend some orders that you go in when doing your upgrades. Now, if you're going to use CO2 on your gun, I recommend that you use nothing less than a 20-ounce CO2 tank. Anything less, then you're going to be putting a lot of liquid through the gun, and that's going to be pretty tough on the regulators and the O-rings inside the gun. So to avoid that, at least get a 20-ounce tank, and if you can, put an anti-siphon kit on the tank. But if you have the money to spend, I would definitely recommend that you use nitrogen on your gun. It's going to make the gun a lot more consistent, and it's also going to be a lot easier on the O-rings inside the gun. It's just going to make it last for a lot longer. With either a larger CO2 tank or nitrogen installed onto your gun, the best thing that I recommend to do is get a new barrel for your gun. I recommend a 2-piece barrel over a 1-piece barrel. However, that's all subject to people's opinion. I've found that a 2-piece barrel I get a lot more accuracy and consistency with. I don't have as many balls deviating and just kind of shooting off 10 or 15 feet and spiraling away. But what you want to look for when buying a barrel is you just want to have a barrel that has a good finish on the inside. It's free of any nicks or burrs that might be in there to chop the paint as it slides by. But like I said, it doesn't really matter what length barrel you go with. Generally, the longer the barrel, the more it knocks down the noise. But I think it's false that the longer the barrel that you have, the more accurate it is, or the more distance that you'll get out of the ball. So really, just pick a barrel all on personal preference. Again, it doesn't matter what length you go with, just look for one that has a good finish on it. With a good barrel on your gun, the next thing that I recommend is to put a new bolt on. Here, you can see that we have the stock bolt. It's got the open face bolt. There are many aftermarket bolts that continue to have this open face style. I don't really prefer that one. I prefer the one that has the holes, several holes. Many have 10 that are scattered around the edge of the bolt. I think that provides just a really good distribution of the air on the back of the ball. It also cuts down the noise when cycling the gun substantially. There are also some other companies out there that are putting 3 large holes on the face of the bolt. It distributes the air pretty well on the ball, and I haven't personally used one, but I've heard a lot of good things about them. So after you have a good barrel, it's not a bad idea to put a new bolt on the gun. With a new bolt installed on your gun, I generally recommend going straight to the front block. The first part on the front block that I would ever recommend changing out would be your 3-way. These are 2 examples of aftermarket 3-ways that you can install on your gun. The silver one here is a die, and the green one here is a Shock Tech. That's the Bomb 3-way. Both are great 3-ways. I haven't really noticed a lot of difference between the 2 of them. They both have provide a very short trigger pull and make it pretty difficult to short stroke. So if you're looking for more shots per second and less ball chopping and half stroking, then I would recommend putting a new 3-way on your gun. That makes it so that your trigger pull is just a lot less than it was with the stock 3-way. And a way to gauge whether or not a 3-way is going to shorten up your trigger pull or not, I say look at the prongs. The closer the prongs are together, it means you're going to have to pull the trigger that much less to actually actuate the 3-way. So again, the first thing that I'll do on the front block is put a new 3-way on. After you do the 3-way, I think it's best to go ahead and put a new LPR, or low pressure regulator, on the front block. This is going to allow you to cut down on the recocking pressure, and when you do that, the gun runs quieter, a little bit more gas efficient, and it's also going to cut down on the number of times that you chop paint when you half stroke the gun. Now this great upgrade is totally optional. The main regs that come on most WGP autocockers are excellent regs. They have real high flow rates, and most people can't complain about them one bit. But there are those people who look for putting a new main reg on their gun. The one I have here is a die reg. They're also supposed to have really high flow rates and be really good regs. They're not necessary, but if you do want to put a reg on, there are a lot of companies out there that make excellent aftermarket regs. The last upgrade that I would recommend doing to your gun would be to replace the valve that's on the inside. There are a lot of companies out there that make some really great valves. Shock Tech makes a great one. Free Flow also makes a really good valve. You can put a valve in. Generally, it's going to make the gun operate at a much lower pressure than it does stock. But once you do that new valve, you are going to need to get a new main reg to drop the pressure if yours isn't adjustable. Many of the WGP ones are adjustable, but you are going to need to compensate for that new valve that you're putting in your gun. One of the things I see a lot of autococker owners do is what I call popping the trigger, when they think that they're an electronic gun owner and they can just do what everyone else does and go like that to shoot really fast. Well, when you do that, you're going to break a lot of paint. I recommend that you fully pull the trigger because you're going to short stroke if you don't. Unless you have a really tight, sensitive three-way and trigger, you're going to short stroke every time you do that, and you're just going to spray paint out the front. So don't pop your trigger, pull your trigger.
Todd, that was really great, and I hope everybody learned how to take apart their autococker now, clean it, troubleshoot it, and retime it, and of course install the hinge trigger, which is one of the more popular trigger frames for the autococker.
Well, me too, Gary. I had a good time doing it too.
That concludes another edition of Tech Videos. Until the next time, keep shooting.